Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. As many of you know who watch my backpacking videos, I love to go hammock camping. That is my preferred shelter when I am out on the trail. It gives me the best night's sleep and it is my preference. I've been hammock camping for 6 or 7 years now and feel like I have my system really dialed in for the different types of trips that I do. Because of that, I'd like to create a series of videos, kind of a hammock camping one-on-one that gives some of the basic tips and tricks for how to go hammock backpacking. I know when I first started, there was guys out there like Syntax 77 and Shug and Frozen, and I learned so much from those guys and watching their videos. And I wanted to give back to this community. They helped me out so much with their videos, and I'm hoping that my videos can help some new backpackers out there who are potentially interested in using a hammock. And so I want to create a series of videos that would help them understand what they need to do to go hammock backpacking. So there are 4 essential pieces of gear that you need to have to go hammock camping. The first, obviously, is a hammock. You need a hammock. But it's not so simple, just going out and buying a hammock. There are a lot of different options that you need to consider. First, I would consider the type of hammock. So there are gathered in hammocks where the fabric at the end of the hammock kind of gathers in into a continuous loop. This is the lightest weight option that you can have out there. Or there are bridge hammocks. And a bridge hammock have spreader bars which spread out the fabric, and then it has kind of cords that create a continuous loop that you then attach to the end of your suspension. And the bridge hammocks are extremely comfortable. They give you that true flat lay for a better night's sleep, but they are heavier. There's more fabric, you have the spreader bars, and so it's just a much heavier hammock, but you have a better night's sleep. At least I do. So there are different types of trips that I'll take a bridge hammock on. If I'm just going on a 2 or 3 day trip and maybe I'm hiking in that first day and I'm just going to make base camp there and do day hikes throughout my trip, that would be an option. Or if sleep is a real priority, then I will choose a bridge hammock because I do get my best night's sleep in a bridge hammock. But the gathered in hammock is my typical go-to hammock that I use. It's the lightest weight one that I have. And even with your gathered in hammock, there's some things you need to consider, whether it's asymmetrical or symmetrical. So typically the type of hammocks that you buy in the big box stores, like the Eno, are symmetrical hammocks and not really designed for sleeping in overnight. They're great for car camping. They're even great for backpacking trips for something you may want to lounge in during your trip, but they're not really designed for sleeping in overnight because it's hard to get a flat lay, and instead you kind of have this banana shape, and as you lay in it and you have pressure on the back of your legs, which causes your legs to ache. So that's why you choose an asymmetrical hammock. Which means both sides are not, they're not symmetrical, which allows you to lay at an angle. And this allows you to achieve that flat lay as if you were laying on the ground instead of that banana shape, which relieves the pressure off of the back of your legs. So that's what I have. I have a couple of 11-foot asymmetrical hammocks. I will say that I know when my son was, he's been backpacking with me since 9, 10 years old, when he was probably 5 foot, 5'3". The symmetrical ones work just fine. And I think that's because of his height was small enough and the fabric was long enough that he still slept comfortable in a symmetrical hammock. But when he started to grow like he is now, he says he's 6'1", but I still think he's 6 foot. He has now switched into an asymmetrical hammock because the symmetrical one just wasn't working out for him anymore. So I definitely would recommend, if you're going to get a gathered in hammock, to get an asymmetrical one. It'll provide you a better night's sleep. The two other things that you need to consider with your hammock options is one, the length of it. So the one I'm actually sitting in now is a 10-foot hammock, and I typically use it just for lounging. You can see there is a ridge line here, but I don't have a bug net or anything on it. But it's great for lounging. It's super lightweight. But typically, I've seen hammocks range from 9 to even 12 feet. I have an 11-foot hammock, 11-foot wide hammock. 11 foot is to me what has worked best for me, and I like a wide option if it's available because I think it allows me to spread, even make that angle even greater as I'm laying in it to get that flatter lay. So that is what I would prefer. So think about the length that you want. Also think about the fabric. I know for these cottage vendors, when they sell their hammocks, you can buy different types of fabric. And the lightest weight fabric, they have weight capacities on them, which may limit some people. So I'm 6 foot, around 195, 200 pounds. And the fabric that I use holds a max capacity of 200 pounds. And that has worked out best for me. But there are other fabrics that the manufacturers will sell that will go all the way up to like 350-pound capacity. So anybody can really go hammock camping, but just be mindful when you're buying your hammock. Look at the fabric that you want to select and look at that weight capacity to make sure that that is what works out for you. Another thing you need to consider with your hammock is whether or not you want a bug net. So this one here, it doesn't have a bug net, and I have backpacked in this before, and I have a Dutch netless hammock, which I love, that I took on my Linville Gorge trip this year, and it works fabulously. So you don't necessarily need a bug net, but that will be determined by where you are backpacking. Typically here in Colorado, I've noticed even in buggier environments that once that temperature drops, once that sun sets, and the temperatures drop, the bugs go away. And I have been fine without a bug net. Typically, I bring one. So my other hammock, my Dutch Chameleon, has a bug net which you can zip on or off. And that's why I love the Chameleon, because it's very customizable. I can take my bug net off if I don't need it, or I can put it on if I do. But just be mindful that, if you are in very buggy environments, like I've seen on the JMT, which I'm hoping to hike next year, probably going to use a bug net. I've seen too many videos where there's a lot of water and people are wearing the bug head nets. And so I imagine at night that I'm going to need a bug net. But again, it's will be dependent on the trip that you take, whether you need a bug net or not. But that is something that you may want to consider as part of your hammock setup. The second essential piece of gear that you're going to need is something to hang your hammock to the tree, and that's called Hammock Expension. And there's all types of hammock suspensions out there that you can choose from. Here are just some of the more popular ones that I have used over the course of time. First, you have the daisy chain. This is probably the simplest, easiest setup that I have found for hanging your hammock. It's also the heaviest, and it also doesn't let you dial in exactly how you may want to hang your hammock in terms of like the height of your head and your foot. So this is the example of a daisy chain. As you can see, it has these loops throughout the strap, and you can use this to wrap around the end of your tree, which I have here hooked to my wall. And then you have your carabiner here, which is hooked onto the end of the loop of your hammock. And then you can just easily, put it into the hoop that you want to adjust your hammock. So this is super easy for setup. It just doesn't quite give you the ability to dial in because you're dealing with these 2 to 3 inch loops here. And so you can only really go from 2 to 3 inches of how your hammock is going to either drop or be raised. So there is you are limited a little bit of exactly how you can hang using a daisy chain. So if you don't want any, fuss with setting it up, daisy chains are the way to go, but they are heavier. And I say heavier, heavy is relative in terms of backpacking gear. I would say it is a few ounces more than my lightest weight option. So I'm not saving a pound, I'm not even saving half a pound, but I do save ounces by using lighter weight options. So another option you have is the cinch buckle. So this is a Kevlar strap that wraps around the tree and has a cinch buckle on it. So this is superior to the daisy chain in one, that it's much lighter weight, and two, the cinch buckle allows you to dial in exactly where you want the height of your head and your feet to be when hanging your hammock. So this is the example of a cinch buckle hammock suspension. It's a Kevlar strap, very strong, very lightweight, much more lightweight than the daisy chain. Has this continuous loop at the end that you can wrap around your tree and pull the strap through to secure it. But the advantage of this, unlike the daisy chain where you're limited to that every 2 inches or so, is that you can dial this in exactly how you want to. You can pull it in or you can tighten it, and you can see that, that's pretty tight right there for holding your hammock. Then again, carabiner, or you may have some other type of hook, but easily you can just take a carabiner again on the end of your hammock, dial it in there, and then that is your cinch buckle. The thing that I have issue with is, you see this? That better be lined up exactly. It better be flush in terms of how that strap is. And I think that's what's happened to me a few times, is maybe I was careless or wasn't paying attention, and that wasn't flush, and the strap slipped on me. That you can undo it, tighten it up, but that is the cinch buckle. But the cinch buckle is a great option, super lightweight, lets you dial in, gives you great flexibility with the distance between your trees. It is an excellent option for hanging your hammock. The third option, and this is the one that I use that I find superior, are the Whoopy Slings. So the Whoopy Slings have a piece of Kevlar strap at the end, a shorter strap, which wraps around, and I have a little Dutch hook which secures it to the tree. And then you have the Whoopy Sling, and that Whoopy Sling has a little hook at the end which connects to my continuous loop, and that eliminates the need for a carabiner, as well as the material is a lot less than the Kevlar strap. So this is my lightest weight option that I have, and it is the one that I prefer to use over anything else. So this is a Whoopy Sling. Again, it has a shorter Kevlar strap. I have a little Dutch hook here at the end that I use to wrap around my tree. But for the sake of this being in my room, I just hooked the very end of this strap onto my hook. But typically your strap will go around your tree like this, and that'll create it and secure it around your tree. And then here you have your Whoopy Sling, and this is what I've heard is called a berry, which has to be tightened. So you can either, loosen it up, you pull on that, hammock goes down, or you pull on this, and then your hammock goes up. So you can dial it in exactly how you want. Extremely lightweight, even lighter weight than my cinch buckles. The thing you have to be mindful of is this berry. As I've heard Shook say, you got to squeeze that berry. You got to squeeze that berry, because then that tightens, that creates the tension inside of the rope in here, so it doesn't pull, and it can hold your weight. And there's no carabiner, so you have just a little hook. So this is a Dutch Whoopy Sling, And my Dutch Whoopy Sling has a little tiny hook which connects to the end of my continuous loop on my hammock, and that gives me a lighter weight option than using the larger carabiners. The only issue that I've had with the Whoopy Slings is the distance between the trees. I've found that it is not as flexible as with like the daisy chain or the cinch buckle and having trees closer. I needed them a little bit further apart because of the length of the Whoopy Sling and the strap. And so it's finding trees that are far enough apart. Typically 20 feet or more is what works best for me. If it is closer, then sometimes I'll find myself having to, loop that strap around the tree a couple times, and it works. I've done that several times, and that issue works, or that solves that problem. But that is something that you need to consider. I prefer them. They're the lightest weight. I've never fallen with them. I do have to be mindful of the trees, but they're small, lightweight, compactable, and Whoopy Slings are my choice for hammock suspension. The third piece of gear you'd want to consider is a tarp. Now, some may say this is not essential as, it may not always rain. You may have a trip where it's guaranteed 100% no rain. Well, for me, even when I go on day hikes or backpacking trips, I take a rain jacket, always. I bring a rain cover for my backpack, always. Because I know here hiking in the mountains and backpacking in the mountains, you just never know. You just never know when a quick storm may pop up. So for me, a tarp is essential. It's essential for hanging over your hammock and making sure kind of protecting you from any storms. But plus, I use it for not even just protecting me from rain and hail, but also kind of protect myself and my hammock from things that are just dropping from the tree. I'm not talking like major limbs that are hitting you in the middle of the night. I'm just talking like little pieces of sap or leaves, or I've even had bird poop on my tarp before. So that has prevented things from falling on me in the middle of the night. So I will always take a tarp with me on my backpacking trips. In fact, I even use it sometimes in the middle of a hike. I've been in the Grand Canyon one time, storm was coming through, I could see it coming my way. Well, I found two trees, I hung my tarp, and I just sat underneath it and kind of protected myself from the storm. So it's also beneficial for that. So highly recommend picking out a tarp. Now, saying that, some things about the tarp that you need to consider. One is, how are you going to hang it to your tree? Just like your hammock, you need a hammock suspension. This, you're going to need some kind of cordage as well to be able to connect your tarp to the tree. So here's the connection that I used at the end of my tarp. As you can see, there is a piece of zinget rope, super lightweight. And what I would do is I would wrap this around my tree. And then this here is what they call a Dutch wasp. And this is super simple, where you just slide it in there and then boom, secure. That won't move, right? Because it doesn't need to be that weight bearing. It's just holding your tarp in. But this is what I have found to be the simplest solution for me for hanging my tarp. The other thing that you'll need to consider with your tarp is how you secure it to the ground. For me, I have stakes with zinget rope around it, and then I'll have a Dutch flea at the end of the corners of my tarp connected to shock cord. So what this allows me to do, have flexibility of putting my stakes where I want to in the ground, and then I take that cord, wrap it around the flea, and boom, I tie it off, again, no knots, and it is super simple setup. But just remember, as you're having a tarp, you'll need something to hang it from the tree and to stake it down to the ground. What you'll also need to consider is the length of your tarp. So I have an 11-foot hammock, so obviously I need a tarp that's longer than 11 feet. So I have a 12-foot tarp. It gives me about 6 inches coverage on both ends, which works well for me. But just consider that based on the length of the hammock that you get that works for you, that you're going to need a tarp that will at least cover, I would say at least 6 inches on both sides to give you good coverage. Also, the shape you need to consider. Mine is a standard rectangle. I feel like for me that gives me the greatest comfort in the storms that I've experienced. I know some have like these diamond shaped tarps. One came with my Hennessy hammock, one of the first asymmetrical hammocks that I bought. And I've used it a couple times and just didn't feel like it really gave me the coverage around my feet or my head that I need. It would probably work in a light storm or a light rain, but if you've been out here in Colorado and you've experienced some of these hailstorms or even windstorms like on the Wind River Range, you're going to want more than just a diamond-shaped tarp to cover you. So size and shape are important things to consider, as well as the type of material. So you'll see that mine is made of Dyneema, which is super lightweight, super tough, doesn't absorb water. I love it. It is fantastic. I've been going with one now for 5 years and it is still going strong. The only real issue is that it's expensive, like really expensive. I know 5 years ago it cost me, I believe, a little over $300. I'm assuming it costs more than that today, but I love it. And this is what I do. I mean, backpacking is what I do. It's my hobby. I love it. So I invest in those things like a good lightweight tarp that I can have. But you can definitely find other options, less expensive options. They're going to be a little heavier. Like the polysil nylon will absorb a little more water. It's waterproof, but it retains water a little bit. Maybe take a little longer to dry out as you're carrying water weight if your tarp is wet. So there definitely are less expensive options than Dyneema. But to me, if this is something you're serious about and something you love to do, I would go with the Dyneema tarp. The fourth piece of gear that you're going to need deals with insulation. So if you've ever slept in a hammock without anything underneath you, you know you can get like this frozen butt syndrome. And it's real as the wind is going underneath you. So you'll need something underneath you to keep you warm, as well as something on top of you to keep you warm. So two types of insulation that you need to consider when you go hammock camping. One is the insulation that goes underneath you. And there's really two options that I think are best. One is a sleeping pad and two is an underquilt. The one that I prefer, the one I recommend, is the underquilt. And it is a heavier option. It definitely can be. I have sleeping pads that weigh around 8 ounces, but my underquilt probably weighs 20, 24 ounces, depending on the rating of that underquilt. Obviously, the lower the rating, the heavier it will be. But I like it because I think it provides me more coverage with keeping my feet and my shoulders warm and my whole body throughout the entire night. Because if you've ever put a pad into a hammock, one, it slides around, okay? I even have put my Nemo tensor in there, which I love. Love that sleeping pad. It's 25 inches wide. But even then, I'll notice that, if my feet slide off or my shoulder slides off as I'm rolling around in my hammock, I feel instant cold whenever I come off that pad, right? But with the underquilt, I feel like I'm just kind of wrapped in this insulation and my body is completely warm through the entire night. The only real issue with the underquilt is there's a lot of fine tuning as you try to hook it to the ends of your hammock and dial it in that it'll cover your feet as well as your head as you're laying at an angle in your hammock. There's a lot of cords that you have to tighten up to close any air gaps. So there is a lot of fine tuning that you need to do with your underquilt. But once you get that figured out, I don't think there's anything that can beat it. So here's an example of an underquilt on one of my hammocks and the cordage that I'm talking about. First, you know how you have this little S carabiner that you would hook at the top of your continuous loop. That's where that attaches. and then it's got cordage coming down to here on both ends, really. And here you've got this little cord here, and what this does is that cinches the length of your underquilt to tighten up. It also has a cord here which eliminates the kind of any air pockets that may occur here. So you have to kind of dial in the cordage on both sides of your hammock, of whether you sleep left to right or right to left on your angle, as well as you have to do it on the other side of the hammock, and that just takes a bit of fine tuning. So I would definitely recommend an underquilt over a sleeping pad. I do know some hammocks come with sleeves in them that you can slide in that sleeping pad. That makes it a little easier for the pad not to move, but it doesn't eliminate the option of me sliding off as I may roll around in my hammock, because I like to move around a little bit at night, and I feel like the underquilt is the best option for that. So you need something underneath you to keep you warm for most of my trips. There have been a couple trips like in the Grand Canyon where the low was like 85, 90 degrees, and yeah, I didn't need anything underneath me or on top of me. But I've been on other trips where it got down to 70, and I thought, oh, 70 degrees, that's not too bad. I'll be fine. And sure enough, I froze my tail off, and I needed something, a little something, not a lot, but I did need a little something, even when it dropped down to 65, 70 degrees. And I'm a warm sleeper. So that told me right there, I need something underneath me for most of my backpacking trips. The other type of insulation you'll need is something on top of you. And I use a top quilt. I use a top quilt instead of a sleeping bag. Because the one thing I've learned about a sleeping bag, and this is my very first hammock trip, is that sleeping bag does not provide you insulation underneath you. Right, because once you lay on that sleeping bag, you crush all of that loft. And that loft is what captures all the heat from your body to keep you warm. As soon as you crush that loft, you lose all the heat that it was capturing, and it provides you no warmth. So with knowing that a sleeping bag is not going to provide me warmth underneath, then I just wanted something more like a blanket that lays on top of me. And that's the joy and the beauty of the top quilt, especially for hammock camping. Because I already have something underneath me that's keeping me warm. I just need something to lay on top of me like a blanket. And mine has a foot box at the end that I can keep my feet in, that keeps me warm and wraps it around. And mine will even allow you to button up and zip up to make it a little more like a mummy bag if you want. But for me, a sleeping bag it's kind of restrictive, as I'm trying to roll around, the mummy bag kind of feel like I'm, tightened in with it. But with the quilt and like the blanket, again, I have more freedom and more room to move around as I am sleeping. So when you're hammock camping, you'll want to have some type of insulation underneath you and on top of you to keep you warm during the night. So those are the 4 essential pieces of gear that you're going to need to go hammock camping. 1, obviously, you're going to need a hammock. 2, you're going to need some type of suspension, something that you can hang your hammock from the tree. 3, you'll need some type of protection from the elements around you when it rains or when it storms. So you'll need some type of tarp to go over top of you. And then 4, insulation that keeps you warm underneath and warm on top. There are a lot of different options for each one of those pieces of gear, and you just need to figure out what works best for you. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. I hope you have found it helpful and better understanding the type of gear that you're going to need to go backpacking, as well as some useful comments about what to consider for those different pieces of gear, and understanding that there's a lot of nuances when you go hammock camping. It's not just pitching up a tent and then going to sleep. There's some things that you're going to need to consider and learn how to dial in order to do it right. And when I say do it right, I mean sleep well, be comfortable, be protected, and have a good time using a hammock. Because there is a learning curve and there's some fine tuning that is needed. But I think once you get over that learning curve, there's nothing like hammock camping. But thanks for watching. See you in the next video.